achieved.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to Studio de Jeffrey de Quarantine. Can I still say that? I guess it's not quarantine anymore. Studio de Jeffrey de mostly quarantine, unless I'm headed to the grocery store or somewhere else. Got a few good topics for you today in Cowboy land, and the first one is the NFL screwing it up at building defenses? That's a hot title, right? But what it is, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about, should NFL teams be more worried about building up their cornerbacks? Are the Cowboys doing it wrong by going the opposite direction? We're going to talk about Andy Dalton a little bit and what he brings and if he had to play. And Aldon Smith, what if he reached all of his, what do you call those things? Boy, you're off to a hot start today, Jeff. Incentives. He reached all of his incentives. Okay, but the first thing that I want to talk about, and this relates to Byron Jones, it relates to Amari Cooper, it relates to CeeDee Lamb, it relates to Byron Jones' new team, and I think it is a phenomenal topic. You guys tell me in the comments on the YouTube page, youtube.com/Jeff Kavanaugh, if you're tired of nerd stuff, and if you just want hardcore opinion pieces where I'm like, Dak's the best! And if you don't like that, suck it, bro. But my buddy Jason at overthecap.com, I thought, wrote an outstanding article where he put a ton of work into this. And the question is, how come nobody's trying to build a super team in the secondary, especially at corner? And why does this topic come up? And I'm sorry if you can hear my Roomba. It'll probably get closer at some point. But why does this topic come up? Well, I'll take you through step by step his information. And again, I really do want to know if on the videos you guys want less numbers, if you think it's kind of a beatdown, let me know. I'm interested in it, and I think and I try to frame it in a way that's not too much of a beatdown, but sometimes you have to run through the numbers to establish the premise, right? So the premise of his article is, should teams spend more on cornerback? And what we're going to do is we're going to compare wide receiver and cornerback. Cowboys right now are spending big money on Amari Cooper, just spent a first-round pick on CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup was a third-round pick. At corner, they're currently spending not a lot, pretty much nothing. Roomba's getting closer. I can hear it creeping. So we'll start here. The average NFL team, and no NFL team falls straight into average, of course, so you have to adjust a little bit for every individual team, but on every NFL team, if you average it out, and then you look at their best wide receiver, the best wide receiver on an NFL team averages 117 targets, 77 catches, a catch rate of almost 66%, just over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's not the main point, but that's your baseline. The second wide receiver on an NFL team obviously doesn't put up the same stats as a number one wide receiver because he doesn't get the same number of targets. The average number two wide receiver gets 80 targets. It's almost 30 less than the 90, 100, 110. It's almost 40 less than the average number one wide receiver. Catch rate is 2% lower. Yards per target is just 0.2 yards lower, yards per target. Number three wide receiver, you drop another percent on catch rate. And on yards per target, you drop almost half a yard. So there is a drop-off there. Pretty decent drop-off. But remember those drop-offs. That's what matters, right? From number one wide receiver to number two wide receiver, your yards per target, 0.2 is the drop-off. To your number three wide receiver, the drop-off is about a half a yard. Almost a half a yard, which that's a pretty good drop-off. Then to your number four target is another 0.2, and your number five target is another 0.5, right? So those are drop-offs, but they're not giant, but they are drop-offs. Now we want to flip this and talk about cornerbacks. And this applied to the Cowboys last year. You had Byron Jones, who was your best cornerback by far. And then you had your other cornerbacks. So the average best cornerback on an NFL team allows 6.4 yards per target, which that's around where Byron was. He might have been a little better than that, right? He was really, really good. Yards per target, 6.5 yards. Your average number 2 cornerback, 7.8 yards per target. That's almost a full 1.5 yards. So go back to the receiver thing, right? Go back to the receiver thing for just a second. The receiver, average number 1, 8.6 yards per target. Number 2, 8.4 yards per target. But at corner, 6.4 to 7.8. That's a big-ass drop. Sorry for the language. That is a big old drop from your number 1 to your number 2 corner. Your average number 3 corner is 8.5 yards per attempt, and that's awful. That is terrible. That means you throw at that dude all day and you get your shine on. It's like when Revis was with the Jets and Peyton Manning threw to Austin Collie and I forget who else for like 300 yards. He was like, screw you, Revis. These other guys can't cover. Bow, bow, bow. So that's a big disparity, right? The drop-off from your number 1 receiver to when I throw to my number 2 and my number 3 is a little bit, but the drop-off when I target your number 2 and number 3 cornerbacks is giant. So, with that information, the question becomes, how come teams continue to invest so much in the wide receivers and not as much in the cornerbacks when the difference between the really good ones and the next guy down is much smaller? And that's what Jason's doing on overthecap.com. And it's a great article, and I can't go through all of it because there's a ton of information in it. So I'm trying to take what I consider to be the most important parts of it. And that is the most important part. The other thing I would add is he looked around the league for how many teams have really tried to have 3 really good corners. Because if I can have 3 really good corners, and all of a sudden the yards per target that I allow, my number 1 is 6.4, and my number 2 is no longer 7.8. Maybe he's 6.5, 6.7. And my third guy, maybe it's 7 yards instead of 8.5. Well, holy cow, what I've just done to your passing game against me. You've got to start throwing to different guys and being inefficient, and now we have to factor in the other part of this. It's a salary cap league, so it's hard to do. But there is one team in the league right now, one team who has 4 guys that play corner that make more than the average third corner on a roster. So there's one team that is over-investing to make sure they have more than 3 guys that they feel good about doing the job. And who is that? It's Patriots. Surprise. New England Patriots are usually ahead of the curve. And they're the one team where he broke down the average salaries of every team's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 corner, and then looked how many have invested at least the average cost of a number 3 corner in 3 guys. All right, how about 4 guys? And the only team there is the New England Patriots, who were ahead of the curve on how important coverage is, and that coverage probably more important than pass rush. I'm not saying that as a definitive. I'm saying it as a kind of. Now, to triple nerd this thing up. You guys are going to kill me in the comments for too much nerd stuff here. But this is, to me, why football is the most fascinating sport to cover, to analyze, and to try to get right and to talk about the team building. Based on this information, I would say the Cowboys are doing it wrong. You let Byron Jones walk. Because another thing he did in here is, how often or what is the route to a cornerback that is going to play above average? And by far, it's guys who have been extended, which makes sense, right? You want to keep the guy, you extended him. And the Cowboys, instead of going that route, are going the draft route, where the odds of getting an above average guy, let me see, in the second round, Trevon Diggs, 39%. Extending a guy, 70%. Now, these are percentages. These have nothing to do with your individual players. Excuse me. But the numbers say if you had a really good cornerback like Byron, you should have extended him. And the odds that you get at least above average corner play are through the roof, whereas with the second rounder, the odds you get above average corner play are worse than 50-50. They're actually worse than 60-40. So a lot of this is adding up to, dang it, you shouldn't have let Byron Jones go. You should have extended Byron Jones. and figured out different guys to let go. But here's the caveat and why analytics is both maddening and fun, and why NFL team building is both maddening and fun, because it's almost impossible to get this is the way you should do it. I've gathered a lot of analytical information over the years. I know the results of a lot of studies in the NFL, but it doesn't always give you you should do things this way. Cowboys have invested in their 3 wide receivers as opposed to 3 cornerbacks. That's the route they've chosen. I'm a believer in that. The offensive passing game is the most important thing in the NFL. Invest your resources in the offensive passing game. So Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, let's go. Love it. To not invest at corner based on this information is a really bad idea. Because which guy on the Cowboys is going to be the number 1 corner that's only allowing 6.4 yards per attempt or per target? I don't know. They'll probably be worse than that. Ready for the wild card? The wild card is corner is also the most fluid year to year in terms of how guys perform. Probably because if you play against good quarterbacks one year who put the ball in good places throwing to good wide receivers, your numbers won't look as good. And then if you play against worse receivers, your numbers will look better. Even at corner, your job is somewhat dependent on the opponent that you're playing and how well they play. Offense usually will tell you how good or bad the other team's defense is going to be because it's more about the offense. It's an offensive league. So wide receiver play, Amari Cooper is likely to be Amari Cooper pretty much every year. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be DeAndre Hopkins every year. Byron Jones is less likely to be Byron Jones than he was a year ago every year. It's just what the studies and the information and the data tells us. The cornerback play is the toughest to predict from year to year. Wide receiver is much easier. Quarterback is much easier. Defensive ends, much easier. Cornerbacks are kind of the wild card. So while you want to build a super team of cornerbacks, it's also harder to predict that they'll still be a super team a year later. So it's fascinating, but I think the Cowboys are doing it the right way, because what have the Cowboys done? Instead of valuing cornerback number 1 super highly, they're chasing cornerback 2 and 3, and they're trying to have 6 of them. Sorry, my throat is jacked up today. And I like that. Where this year it's bring Anthony Brown back. You still have Cheeto and Jordan Lewis, so bring Brown back. Draft a guy in the 2nd round. Draft a guy in the 4th round. Maybe we got a guy on the practice squad, maybe 2 of them that we kind of like. Bring in Darryl Worley, add a veteran. Bring in Maurice Kennedy. They're bringing in all these dudes that have the potential to be cornerback 3, cornerback 4. And because from year to year it's harder to predict cornerback play, I like that strategy of saying, you know what we're going to do is we're going to stockpile dudes that we think can be a top 4 corner. And we're going to have 6 or 7 of those while investing most of our assets in the offense. So it's a wild conversation trying to get to the bottom of how should you build a team? Well, depends on which study you go with. So you factor in all of them, and then you do your best. I like the way the Cowboys are doing it. A great test run of this is going to be the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins, and they're also a great example of this already. Xavier Howard was incredible, got giant payday, wasn't as good last year. Byron Jones just got paid. So they got 2 of the highest paid corners in the league, and they used a 1st-round pick on Noah Igbenogany out of Auburn to be their 3rd corner. A lot of people kind of looked at him like, what the hell are you doing? The answer? What Jason from Over the Cap said. Trying to make sure that we don't have a depth chart that's like, well, if you throw at him, you get bad results. If you throw at him, you get good results. If you throw at him, you get great results. No. They're trying to say all of us are tough to throw at. You don't get to have 2 guys out here that you're just picking on and tearing up. We're going to try to build a super group. So the Dolphins will be a great test case, and the Patriots are a team that already invests a ton in corner. The 2 other things I wanted to get to quickly was a question from Arthur, I believe, on the YouTube page. Remember, you can leave a comment on the video, youtube.com/Jeff Kavanaugh. And I'll try to talk about your topic tomorrow. Just leave a comment. He said, if Dak holds out the whole year, how successful will the Cowboys be with Dalton starting 16 games? One, Dak won't hold out because there's no point. Once you pass July 15th, if you don't have a deal done, you cannot sign a deal until next offseason. So if he sat out, he'd literally be sitting out for no reason. He would lose all his money, and they can't sign him to a deal, so he's holding out for what? It's not going to happen. But Fantasyland. How good are the Cowboys with Dak? I think there's the potential to win 12 games. I'll pick them to win either 10 or 11, potential to win 12 games. Andy Dalton, I would say there's the potential to win 9 or 10 games, and I'd pick him to win 8 games. So I think Dak is a 3 or 4 game difference over Dalton at least. Dak's a really good quarterback. He's really good. Andy Dalton's not. His team just got the number 1 overall pick. I like him at backup. He's a good backup. But don't do the thing where, we'll start Andy Dalton. That'll teach Dak. We'll intentionally be worse. Chill out with all that, okay? Thanks. And from Elton, do you think if Aldon Smith reaches all his incentives, the Cowboys are number 1 seed in the NFL? Now, let me make sure I have his incentives right, because I believe it was like if he gets 10 or 12 sacks, that he can make up to $4 million. So he's got a $2 million base salary and $2 million in sack incentives, Aldon Smith does. And dang it, I should have had it pulled up in front of me. I used to know these numbers. But the sack incentives, if he reaches it, he'll be a double-digit sack guy, and I think it's at like 12 or 14 that he would get the full $4 million. Could you imagine getting a 12 or 14 sack guy for $4 million? And yes, if Aldon Smith were to achieve those numbers, yeah, you'd be the number 1 seed. Yeah, because I'm certain that you're going to have a good offense. I'm certain you have a good quarterback. I'm certain you've got a really good wide receiver trio. I'm certain you have a good offensive line. If you told me that you have 2 kick-ass pass rushers, yeah, then I think the Cowboys would be the 1 seed. Right there with the Saints. Maybe the 49ers. Maybe the Packers. Probably not. But yeah, for sure. All right. Holy cow. Golly. Need some Mucinex in this piece. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for checking 1053thefan.com every day. Thank you for subscribing to youtube.com/Jeff Kavanaugh. Please leave in the comments what you would like to talk about tomorrow so I can keep the content rolling. I know people like to have things to do. People like to keep their mind occupied, have some fun during the day, and if I'm a part of that, I'm happy to be it. So subscribe to the YouTube page. Tell your friends. Leave a comment. Love you. See you on the radio.